Paula Pant, welcome to the show.
It is so good to be here. Thank you so much for having me on.
So, a little quick backstory. I am a huge fan of Paula Pant and have been ever since I discovered financial independence at the end of 2017. And as part of my journey into the world of financial independence, I started listening to the Afford Anything podcast that Paula has been hosting for many, many years, literally just binging on it like crazy, even binging it on the drive down to the desert,
Hmm.
Joshua Tree, where I went to my first Camp Fi, and Paula Pant was presenting there. And myself and my wife got to meet Paula as well as many other, members of the FI community, the financial independence community. And that trip was so positively impactful, not just like
Mm,
meeting other FI people, but really for my wife to meet you and hear you speak. Because
mm.
up until she heard you speak, I was like this crazy person trying to tell her about financial independence and trying to like tell her we have to be like frugal, like Mr. Money Mustache. And then you said this thing, I don't remember the exact words, but basically you're like, your one of your messages was like don't frugal yourself into a corner and like
Mm,
focus on growing your income or your earning power.
hmm.
And my
Yeah.
wife was like, that's how I want to do it. And so you really
Nice.
unlocked her like to the financial independence journey, whereas before I was like banging my head against the wall and it was causing issues in our relationship. So I deeply want to thank you for playing that part in both my financial independence journey as well as in my marriage with my wife. So thank you,
Oh, that's
Paula.
fantastic. That's fantastic. I'm really glad to hear that.
So I have to know, you've
Hmm.
literally been on a 10-month sabbatical,
Yes.
and my mind is just like blown. Like, as an entrepreneur, a podcaster, a course creator, like, how did you make that happen? And even before that, like, what made you decide to do it?
I started Afford Anything. For a little bit of context into how the sabbatical came to be, I started my company, which is Afford Anything, back in 2011, and I went full time with it in 2016. Um, and Afford Anything, but in 2011, it began as a blog. That was back in the day when blogging was really big. Eventually, it transitioned into it or iterated into becoming a podcast, um, becoming an online course creator. Giving talks, like doing essentially becoming an online destination, an online brand based around personal finance and financial independence. Um, but having done it from 2011 until 20, uh, it was 2022 when I began the sabbatical, 2023 when it ended. Having done it for 11 years, nearly 12 years, I've been able to see over the course of that time how many uh, how many other brands and companies have started and they've existed for a few years, but then they ultimately didn't make it. And I often asked myself, what is it that I'm doing that has allowed me to stay in the game for 12 years while so many others who I know work probably harder than me, um, so many of them pieced out early. And one of the major things that I think really helped was that before starting Afford Anything, I was a journalist. I used to be a newspaper reporter. And so I brought the training that I had as a journalist into, the knowledge that I had around content creation when I switched to digital media. I essentially just made the switch from legacy media to digital media. So it just a more entrepreneurial form of journalism. Um, and that training, that experience that I'd had, I think was instrumental in helping me stand out from the crowd. And so for years I'd been having this thought, if that training and that job experience, which was from, you know, a long time ago, I was a newspaper reporter from 2005 to 2008. So if 3 years of work experience that took place at this point, 17 years ago, was so critical, then what could a year of just deep dive training at the best journalism school in the nation, what could that do? But I didn't want to go in just as a normal, quote unquote, normal student, like any 23-year-old grad student would. I wanted to go in on a fellowship that was specifically geared towards mid-career business and economic journalists. And so I went to Columbia University, which has the best journalism program in the country. I took a fellowship for mid-career business and econ journalists. Um, it was very intimidating because the other fellows were, senior editor. One was a senior editor at Forbes. There are people who had careers at Bloomberg and The Economist. Very high-ranking positions there, or the AFP, or just the BBC, and and from all over the world. When they announced, Columbia University put out a press release announcing the selection of the fellows, and when they put out that press release, my name was listed at the bottom, and I was convinced when I saw it. I was like, "Oh, they put me at the bottom because I'm the least impressive of the bunch." And I thought that for about 3 or 4 days until a friend pointed out to me. She was like, "Paula, it's alphabetical." So I had like raging imposter syndrome going in, but the training that I received and the relationships that I built, particularly with the other fellows, with those mid-career journalists, was just instrumental in changing my craft.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm in preparation for this interview. I was listening to some of your podcast, and like the way you've put your show together, some of the episodes where you do like the listener questions with John Salsihai, it's like very well produced, and I'm
Thank
just
you.
like, I got a little bit of that like fellow podcaster envy. I'm like, oh, it's so good how she does that, and like all the production value. So I'm curious, let's like, how did you actually set up your, like, how do you disappear from a podcast for 10 months and like, and your other businesses? Like, I was listening on your most recent show, and literally said, I have not been on Slack for
Mhm.
10 months. And for the listeners who don't know what Slack is like, it's basically like a messenger system that a lot of companies utilize. And I'm just like, I'm in Slack, Monday through Friday, and I'm just like, 10 months no Slack. Like, how'd you even do that?
Right? Yeah, exactly, exactly. Well, I knew that I needed to keep putting out podcast episodes because that is the most public-facing thing that we do. And in the world of podcasting, it's publish or perish. If you go dark for 10 months, then you're likely to lose a big segment of your audience. And so before the before the fellowship year started, before the sabbatical started, I pre-recorded about 4 months worth of podcast episodes. So that was queued up and ready to go. The following 4 months worth, 4 to 5 months worth, I had to do on the fly, so that made the latter half a little bit tougher. But that took care of the content production. But content production, I think what a lot of people don't know is that the actual public-facing content production is just a small fraction of what we do. So much, and Justin, as I'm sure you know, so much of what we do is behind the scenes. It's the management, the administration, all of that. And so I'd prepped my team in advance. Like we knew probably a year in advance that this was going to be happening. And so everything that we were doing was kind of a year ahead of time, was getting ready for this. And a lot of that just meant, um, making sure that they had the training, the tools, the resources, the empowerment to be able to handle everything on their own. Uh, that said, there were still a lot of times, particularly at the beginning, where something they would need an answer to a question that they felt that only I could provide. Sometimes it was like, "Hey, we have to make this decision, and I'm really torn between A versus B, and I really I don't know which one is the right call. Can you help me out?" Right? Sometimes they would just want to run things by me in that way. Other times it was something that's a little bit more technical, like, hey, we need to log into this particular system, and the system needs facial recognition ID because maybe it's like it's HR, for example. And so it needs a facial recognition ID in order to do the login, and yours is the face that is tagged to the account. So sometimes it was a little bit more technical like that. And so I would still, especially in the beginning, especially for the first few months, I would still get brought in maybe I don't know how many hours a week, but I would still get brought in for things like that. But that abated slowly over the span of those 10 months.
That's great. So, how long did you prepare? Like, how did you say like you prepared for this a year in advance? Like, that's how much time you prepared yourself and your team?
Yes. So I this particular fellowship is quite competitive to get into. And so I had applied for it 3 times before I was accepted. My first time applying was back in 2012, and I was too inexperienced at the time, so I was automatically rejected. My second time applying was in 2020, and they waitlisted me. And so then my third time applying was in 2021. But when they waitlisted me in 2020, they were, you know, they personally reached out to me multiple times and said, "Hey, we're so sorry that we had to waitlist you. You had a very strong application. We strongly encourage you to apply again." And they followed up with me probably 4 or 5 times saying, "Just checking in. We wanted to let you know no waitlist spots have opened up yet, but if any open up, we'll keep you posted." And then a month later, they would send me that same message. "Just want to let you know, still no waitlist spots have opened up." So I knew based on that level of um, outreach that they were doing to me that they were actually serious about wanting me in the program. And I had a pretty good sense that if I applied in 2021, that would mean that I was accepted for the 2022 to 2023 year. So by the time I applied again in 2021, bear in mind this is my third time applying for the fellowship. By the time that I applied for the third time, which was in 2021, I had a pretty strong sense that I would get accepted. So even at the time that I was filling out the application, I was preparing my team. And then once I was actually accepted, then that just formalized what we had already
Yeah.
sort of been training for.
I'm curious, when you first got that first rejection back in 2012, like, did you take that personally? Did it motivate you to do certain things, or was it just like or not that big of a deal to you?
Oh, it firmly planted this fellowship on my bucket list. Um, I knew, and I'd always wanted to go to Columbia University. It's, for journalists, it's the best school in the nation. Um, and I could have gone in even back in 2012. I'm sure I could have gone in just by applying as a student, the normal route. Um, but I don't know why I chose not to. Um, there's some there I guess at that point, I had been in journalism for about 6 years, so I felt like I was maybe slightly, uh, more too experienced to go in as a normal student, which in hindsight is not the case. I definitely could have gone, but at the time, I worried that I was maybe too experienced to go in just as like a typical grad student. Um, but I knew that I was not yet experienced enough to be able to obtain this particular fellowship. And so to me, it just kind of lit a fire under my butt to, you know, to go the extra mile, to have the accomplishments, um, that would generate the level of experience needed to be able to ascend to this next level.
So, if I were to ask you to like coach me on how to prepare to take a 10-month sabbatical, like what are some of the things that you would suggest that I start to think through and the systems that I start to build?
A lot of it is teaching your team how to think like you. In other words, how to make decisions in the way that you do. And so what I would do is any time that I had to make a decision, and then I have to make like, normally dozens of decisions every day, large and small. I spend a lot of time talking through my thought process on here's how I arrived at that decision, and here's why I arrived at that decision. Um, and a lot of that thought process comes back to what are my core values and how do those values reflect in this particular decision. So, let me think of an example. Like one of our values in Afford Anything is that we put our audience first. And that sounds, on the surface, that sounds like a pat cliche, right? But what that means in practice is that if there is ever a decision that we need to make in which the best interests of the audience are in opposition with the best interests of uh, our employees, you know, or our sponsors, or or anything, right? Or what I personally want, the best interests of the audience always comes first. And so, um, it might be that I personally am looking for greater work life compartmentalization. And so maybe there are times that I don't want to, for my online course, there might be times that I don't want to do office hours on a Sunday evening because I want my
Hmm.
Sundays free for myself. But in practice, it doesn't matter what I want. What matters is what's best for the audience. And for the online course, if we poll our students to say, hey, what is the best time for you to come to office hours? And our students overwhelmingly, or at least a strong majority, say Sunday nights are the best time for us, that means I go with the best time for them, not the best time for me, right? And if that means that I have to work on Sunday night or that my team has to work on Sunday night, well, is that what's best for us? No, but is that what's best for the audience?
That makes
Yes. So
sense.
we do that.
I'm curious how you were you always this value of putting your audience first, is that something that developed over time, or is that something that you've always done? Because I can imagine from going from like someone who worked for other companies to having your own business, that maybe you would want to
Mhm.
prioritize kind of your own life over your business, or over business in general, so that you could get back some of that like freedom and autonomy, and mastery over your own life. Where like, is this, yeah, help me understand, like, have you always put your audience first, or were you kind of more selfish in the beginning?
Yeah. No, no, it's been rather the opposite trajectory. So in the beginning, I put the audience first to a fault, to such an extent that it kind of hamstrung the business. Because here's another example. In When I started the podcast, I didn't run any ads on the podcast until
Mm,
after episode 83. Um, and part of the reason for that is that when I initially ran my first sponsor, it was Blue Apron, which was a meal kit delivery service. And we ran that ad and we got 2 or 3 emails from people who were like, "How dare you claim that you want to help people with financial independence while you're encouraging them to, like, eat food, in a way that is more expensive than a grocery store?" Um, and when we got those first few emails, we thought, "Oh, wow, we're doing a disservice to our audience by promoting Blue Apron, so we're just not gonna take that sponsor." And so what ended up happening was for the first 83 episodes. Now think about that. At one episode a week, that is over a year, right? For the first 83 episodes, we basically didn't monetize the podcast at all. We left tens of thousands, maybe $100,000 on the table. I mean, I'd have to look at what our numbers and our rates were at the time to be able to come up with a precise figure. But at a minimum, it was tens and tens of thousands of dollars just on the table, right? And that money, especially to pay the team, had to come from somewhere, right? And so what that meant was that I, on the side, am writing freelance articles, which is something that it generates. It's trading time for money. It doesn't do anything to actually grow the business, but it allows me to pay the team. And but it takes time away from the actual podcast itself, right? So I thought that I was serving my audience by kowtowing to the
Mm.
vocal minority, right? To the squeaky wheels, when in fact all I was doing was kowtowing to the trolls, and it took me a long time to learn the difference. In fact, I think I'm still very much learning the difference.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm going through a similar
Yeah.
process where I'm trying to find the balance between in example for myself. So I have a coaching program, and it's both group coaching and one-on-one coaching. And for the group coaching, I'm trying to thread the needle of like times that work for the members, but also times where I'm at my best, like energetically, so that I can really deliver. Because I'm a morning person,
Mm-hmm.
so like trying to do things in the evening
Mm.
is like I'm just not going to be. I'm going to be like 50% capacity in terms of like brain power,
Yeah.
inspiration, energy, insight, and able to give. But I also know that like for a lot of people, evenings are better because they're not at work. And so I've been trying to like figure out like
Mm-hmm.
what is that middle ground for me where I'm serving my audience um by making sure that they're getting the best version of me, if that makes sense, which may not be the
Right.
most convenient time for
Right.
all the members. But the way I've kind of straddled that is I offer two different times in the week, and so as long as they can make one of them, they're kind of like good to go.
Right.
So
Right. Yeah.
jumping back into your podcast, as you know, somebody who's been doing this for a very long time at this point. I'm curious, what kind of
Mm-hmm.
recommendations or feedback would you give to somebody who's in their first year or maybe just completed their first year of podcasting? They really love it, and they haven't really been focused too much on necessarily growing the podcast, but more just really creating content that they would listen to and that they're proud of, that they think is of service. But now kind of they're a year in, and now they're like, okay, what are the things I need to do in the next 1 to 3 years to really like continue to stay authentic, but also like start to push for more growth?
Yeah. Focus on the audience and focus on, it's not about what you as a podcaster, it's not about what you
Mm-hmm.
want, it's about what they want. And so part of the reason, for our episodes, every other episode we answer questions that come from our community. And a big piece of why we do that is A, it directly serves them, but B, it also informs us about what questions they have, what they're thinking about, right? Um, and you can see patterns shift over time. Sometimes it's seasonal, like of course around tax season we get more tax questions. That's you know that's just a annual, like seasonal routine. Um, Sometimes it's a bit more broad or macroeconomic, like people will say, "Hey, I'm hearing a lot on the news lately about possible student loan forgiveness. Um, should I be baking that into my plans? Should I be thinking about that? Like, here's my list of debts. I've got student loans and car loan and a credit, this and that, X and Y and Z, and I'm trying to prioritize. So how should I be thinking about that? And so sometimes there will be something that happens in a broad macroeconomic sense, something that happens in the news, um, that pushes a new genre of questions, and that's when I know, all right, I need to be addressing this. Recently, inflation or fears of a recession, those types of things have come up a bit more. So really listen to what your audience is asking for, and that doesn't necessarily mean follow, you know, follow the follower, so to speak. Like, again, there's a distinction. You are still the leader, so there's a distinction between kowtowing versus, um, listening and reflecting back. And I think it takes time, practice, reflection to be able to know that distinction. What is the difference between serving versus
Hmm.
being subservient?
Yeah. What I'm constantly kind of doing through my podcast is I'm trying to put myself in their shoes. Like, what are the conversations as well as the topics, both at a macro level, like what's the overall kind of like theories behind things, at a more, medium level, what are the strategies? And then at like a very like micro level, like what are the tactics that the audience needs in order to get from where they're at to the next level? And kind of the way I think about my audience is there's kind of like two parts of the audience. One of them are like entrepreneurs. They're already on that
Mhm.
journey. So it's like, how do they take where they're at and get to the next level? And that's like one of the major sections of the listeners. And then the other section is the person that's like still in the 9 to 5, and they're ready to start to build a path towards more freedom, more autonomy, and like a life that feels more in line with really like how they want to live and who they want to be in this world. And so like those people need kind of
Mm,
more like strategies and ideas of how do they start to get out of their 9 to 5, and then the entrepreneurs, like how do they go from like 0 to 1. So
right,
um
right.
if I were to ask you, let's say we had a hypothetical 30-year-old person who makes 70 to 100
Mhm.
grand, maybe even a little bit more if they live in like the Bay Area or New York City. They have, maybe 5 to 10 grand in like credit card debt. Maybe they're carrying a mortgage. They don't really have much investments, but they're secure in their job, but they are definitely not psyched about the next 10 to 20 years of their life and their work. What would you recommend
Mm.
they start to think through?
Um, so a couple of things. One is if they have any credit card debt, uh, pay that sucker off immediately. That's that first and foremost before you do literally anything else. Get rid of your credit card debt, because that's the highest interest debt that you could ever have. Um, I shouldn't say could ever. I guess there's like a few. Um, a payday loan would be more expensive, but likely your credit card debt is going to be your most expensive debt by far. So get rid of that right off the bat. After that, I think there's two issues to address. There's the logistical or tactical. What do I do? In terms of, um, how do I direct any savings that I have towards investments? uh there's the tactical aspect of the question, but then there's the other thing that you said, which is they're not really that psyched about it. um and so both of those need to be addressed. Which one do you want to tackle first? Because I think those are
I
two
always like
separate
to start with
answers.
the bigger picture. So, like the psyched part to me, because it's like I'm of the
Okay.
proponent. If you have a strong why, then the tactics become easy to
Hmm.
implement. But if you don't have a strong why, the tactics are
Exactly.
like very hard to implement.
Exactly. All right, so they're not that psyched about the next 10 to 20 years. um what that tells me is that the first thing that they need to what you said is a very, very strong guiding why that will motivate them to save and invest more. And when I say save, oftentimes the word save has a connotation of frugality. That's not what I mean. When I say save, what I mean is increase the gap between what they earn and what they spend. Now, you can either increase that gap by earning more, or you can increase that gap by spending less, or you can do a combination of the two. But at the end of the day, savings is the size of the gap between your income and your spending. So push that in whichever direction you prefer. If you want to keep your spending at exactly the level that it's currently at, that's fine. You can keep your spending at precisely exactly where it is right now and then focus on the income side of the equation because that is theoretically unlimited, right? Conversely, if you're already, let's say you're 30 years old and you're making $100,000 a year, but you for your entire life, you never made more than, jack squat, and your family never made more than like jack. And so for you, you're very accustomed to living a $40,000 a year lifestyle because that's maybe up until this age that though that was all the means that you ever had, right? So if that's the case, then you're already comfortable living at a at a $40,000 lifestyle. You can just keep living like that for a few more years, and so by cutting your spending, that's how you increase the gap. So a lot of it, rather than be prescriptive about you should earn more or you should spend less, a lot of it comes down to uh, pick one or the other. Like pick, you can do both, but like pick one dominant strategy, um, and then focus heavily on that. And that's how you're going to create that gap. Um, and then the reason that you want to create that gap, you're going to need a couple of very strong whys. And so that why might be, and those whys are going to fall into a short term, a medium term, and a long term bucket. So in the short term bucket, maybe the reason that you want to build that gap is because you know that you're going to have to go to a bunch of friends' weddings in the next decade, right? You're 30 years old. You're probably like once or twice a year, every year for the next decade. You're going to be flying to California or to Hawaii or to, um, you know, Puerto Rico for like some college buddy's wedding. And you know that those expenses are going to start to pile up and you don't want to miss that. Like, that was your freshman year roommate. You don't want to miss their wedding in Puerto Rico because you can't afford to go. And so maybe that is your why for a short-term bucket. You want to make sure that like you have a specific bucket of money set aside so that you can take these really awesome trips, not just the wedding, but the bachelor party and all of that, right? You want to make sure that you've got that travel bucket or that fun bucket set aside, right? And so that's your why for the short term. And then medium term, maybe within 10 years, you you'd like to buy a home. Maybe you want like, you know, some luxury condo with floor to ceiling windows, or maybe you want a little plot of land where you can like have some chickens, and that is your medium term goal. And then your long term goal is essentially it's taking care of future you. It's wanting to make sure that when you are 70 years old, if your health prohibits you from working, you'll be okay, right? Because um, the number one reason that people retire in America is not because they want to, it's because they have to. It's because either they have a health problem that forces them into an early retirement, or they have a family member, maybe a spouse, who has a health problem and they need to retire in order to take care of that person, right? So the number one reason that people in America retire is involuntary. And that piece, I think, isn't understood enough. I hear so many people say, "Oh, I'm just going to keep working until I'm 80." That's great. If that's what you want, if that's your intention, then I love that you love your work so much that you hope to do that. Like, we all want to be Betty White, who worked until she was 99, right? And she looked like she was having a great time doing it. We all want that, to have a career that is so joyous that we work to the age of 99. But sometimes you have a cancer diagnosis at the age of 62, and that's going to change all of your plans. So those are your whys, and you want to get very, very clear about, dialing in, really like knowing those whys, deeply internalizing those whys, because Justin, to your point, that's going to make implementing the tactics a lot easier.
So before we go like a little bit more into the tactics, or maybe this is the tactics, like the person that I'm often thinking about is like, every year they get a decent raise, maybe it's like a 5 to 20 grand increase, and their spending just continues to like creep up with them. And so like they're never generating any really like much wealth other than like kind of like just the minimum 401k contribution, as well as like building equity in their home. Like how do you but they're unhappy with kind of like the path that they're on, because they desire something more. They want more out of life. They want to do work that is more fulfilling to them. They don't like necessarily hate their job, but they're just like, they're not excited to be alive and to go to work, every week. You know what I mean? And so like, cause I think there's a lot of people like that. It's like life isn't bad, but they're not super excited about their life and they want something more, but they don't really have a lot of wiggle room, because as they've gotten these raises over the years, their kind of like lifestyle just expands to fit the paycheck. And they don't really have that ability to, maybe take a 10-month sabbatical and go do something that really like lights them on fire. Or, they're not creating that gap that you're suggesting for them to build to like, be able to go try something else. So how would you kind of like address that with someone like at the mental emotional level?
Well, first of all, I mean, if you're not excited about your life, um, that's the first thing to address, and that doesn't you don't need money to be excited about your life. At least not above the necessities level, right? If like there's got to be something that sparks your curiosity. It could be um learning chess, it could be a particular sport, it could be learning how to weightlift, it could be or learning how to like how to swim at a competitive level. Um or pickleball, like there's got to be something that lights you up, right? Could be reading books, it could be working with shelter animals, working with like puppies at the local shelter. Like there's got to be something, and none of these things are expensive, but there's got to be something. Could be volunteering with refugees. But something has got to give you that sense of purpose, uh, and that can't just come from from growing your net worth, because ultimately that net worth is a tool, and you use that tool in order to live more in your calling, more in your purpose. But if you don't know what that calling or purpose is to begin with, then having a tool that helps you do more of that isn't really useful. Now, that said, calling and purpose are very, very heavy words. There's a lot of pressure that we put on something. Like, well, I thought I was just playing chess. I didn't realize I was serving, geez, I thought this was just a swimming lesson, right? And so don't give it the burden, the heft of saying, all right, well, this needs to be my purpose. Like, I mean, that's like proposing marriage on the first date. It's just it's too far too fast. Instead, just follow your curiosity. If you are just curious about what it would be like to volunteer with puppies at the local shelter for a Saturday morning, you know, do that. And maybe you'll like it and maybe you won't. But just keep following your curiosity. And the more you follow your curiosity down different roads, the the more something will gel.
Yeah. Okay, let's say they followed a curiosity. Maybe they're really getting into, say, like fitness. And they're and it could be fitness, it could be chess. But they're not excited. So they're excited about fitness or chess, but they're not excited about work. Like it's not bad, it's not killing them, but it's like a third of their life is not exciting for them. It's not killing them, it's not dismal, it's not causing necessarily um depression, but it's
Right.
causing that kind of like just like slow burn kind of angst and discontent.
Yeah.
What is the
Yeah,
next
that ennui.
yeah, what is the next step for that person?
So at that point, then I would say you want to be thinking about making either a job switch or a career switch. And the distinction between the two is if it's a job switch, then it essentially what your, if your hypothesis is that you enjoy this line of work. You just don't like this particular company, this particular office, these particular coworkers, this particular boss. You like the line of work itself. You just don't like the line of work under these particular conditions. Then you'll be looking to switch jobs to stay in the same career, the same role, um, but simply just switch to having a different space in which you do that. The single biggest predictor of somebody's job satisfaction is their opinion of their immediate supervisor. So if you have a great relationship with your immediate supervisor, you are substantially more likely to enjoy your job than if you didn't. So sometimes you might be in the right career for you. You just have a sucky supervisor, and that means you just need to be somebody else's direct report, right? If that's the case, that's the easiest iteration to solve. Now, by contrast, and I see this a lot within the Afford Anything community among my podcast listeners, I hear from a lot of people who are not in the right career. And what's worse is that they've trained for years and years and years in the wrong field. It might be that when they went to college, they majored in accounting because their parents pressured them into studying that, or they pressured themselves into studying that because they thought, well, I can make good money at it. And I'm not picking on accounting. It could be dentistry. It could be, um, I don't know, finance. It could be anything, right? Um, they might have chosen a career because they thought that it made good money. They thought that it had good job prospects coming out of school. And now that they've been in it for 10 years, they're like, man, this is not what I want to do. And I'm just not that into it. And so if that's the case, then you're going to want to make a complete pivot, a pivot to a different type of work entirely. And that means some degree of retraining. You may or may not necessarily have to go back to school. Like going back to school is one of many possible routes, but it does mean some degree of retraining. It means some degree of um, not of being okay with starting at the bottom again, uh, and some degree of kind of testing different ideas to see what you might like. So there are a few ways to approach this. One is that you want to take an inventory of what are your core skills? And when I say skills, I don't mean, oh, I can use Microsoft Excel. Um, when I say skills, I mean at a 30,000 foot level, are you really skilled, broadly speaking, with numbers or with logical thinking or as a communicator? What are those core high level 30,000 foot skills that you have? Um, that's one thing that you want to take an inventory of. You want to take an inventory of what are your core values? Do you value uh, family and autonomy and freedom? And that's going to be the centerpiece of your your selection criteria. Do you value working with a team collaboratively? You want to physically go to an office every day and work with a team on a project. Maybe you really enjoyed doing high school theater. And the thing that you really liked about high school theater is that necessarily you are a team that is working on one specific project. And that was the piece about theater that you liked the most. Maybe you thought all of this time, you mistakenly thought that you were an artist when in fact you were actually just a person who really liked working in a team setting, right? Maybe those are the values that you have. So you want to take an inventory of those values. And you can do that by looking back at some of the things you've done that you've enjoyed and that you've disliked both, and asking yourself, what are the specific attributes about the things I've done that I've liked? You know, um, I enjoy running, but is it that I really like the running itself, or is it simply that I like being outdoors? Or is it that I like, depending on the way that in which you run, is it that I really enjoy being competitive, and I like the fact that I'm competing against others and it's timed, and that's the way that you like to run? Or is it the opposite? Is it, oh, what I like about running is that I do it in a non-competitive way. I never keep time against anyone other than myself. I never compare my miles to anyone other than myself, and what I like about it is the meditative aspect, right? You could take exactly the same action, which is running, but two different people could be practicing that in two very different ways. And what that means is that there are different attributes, different values and characteristics about that same action, that each one of them expresses, and that's informative as to what you're going to want in your next career.
Yeah. This is super powerful and super helpful. I really appreciate you like drawing this out for me, because I'm thinking about the audience, but I'm also thinking about my coaching clients, and you're kind of hitting like different client profiles that I'm just like, oh, this is so good. So there's kind of two parts that I want to cover. One, let's say that person, they actually are really great at their role. They actually like the work that they do. They're just not happy in their company for two reasons. One, their direct manager that they report into, they just like don't feel like that person is necessarily like, they're not excited to work for that person. And then secondly, though they like the role and the work, they don't necessarily find a deep satisfaction or interest in what the company actually does as a business. But they like does
Mm,
that make sense? They like the work,
right.
like they like their role in the job duty of their role, but they're like not very excited about the company. And then they're also in this place where they are they're just like, again, it's not terrible, but they're not excited to go and like work with their manager or their boss, and they're not super excited about what the company does as a business. How would you recommend that person start to like search for other opportunities? Like, because obviously there's like job postings, there's like going through your personal network. And the way I'm kind of thinking, because this is a lot of people, they've like developed a certain level of skill and they actually enjoy the type of work that they do, but they're not stoked on their company, and they just aren't like super stoked about like the person that they have to report into. So how do they then like cross the chasm like into finding that other job and then actually like getting it? Because there's just like, there's so much noise, there's so many job posting. It's like, how do you separate like out and like find that opportunity that is more fitting for you?
Right. So I'd say two things here. First of all, to the profile of the person who they like what they do, but they don't necessarily care much for the output that the company broadly um, creates. What that signals to me is this notion. There are three attributes that are strong predictors of a person's job satisfaction, and that's autonomy, mastery, and purpose, right? So to the person, the profile that you described of someone who they like their role and they like what they do, but they don't really care for making another widget for the widget company, right? What that signals to me is perhaps they have a lot of autonomy and they have a lot of mastery, right? They're able, which is to say, they're able to practice their skill or practice their craft, um, which is the mastery. The practice is the mastery part, right? They're able to practice and improve, and humans naturally just enjoy practicing and improving a skill that we are good at. Like that's just innate, right? So you're able to practice and improve a skill that you're good at. That's great. You're able to do so with a lot of autonomy, without being micromanaged. You know, you have enough freedom, that you're able to do it your way. That's great. So two of the three components are there. That's the good news. Um, the only piece that's missing is the purpose piece, because you've got the autonomy to practice your craft, you've got the mastery over your craft, but if you don't really care for what that craft is ultimately in the service of creating, yeah, you're never going to be that excited about it. Um, and so what that signals to me is either you go off on your own, or and figure out a way that you can practice that craft, um, in a manner that serves others or that solves a problem, in a way that would lend some more purpose to what you do. You can either do that on your own, or you can go do that for an alternate organization that has an output that you believe in. Um, Now, bear in mind, just because another organization has an output that you believe in, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to like your job. There are a lot of people who work for amazing nonprofits, but they dislike their job because, they don't like their boss, they don't like their supervisor. Again, that's the single biggest predictor. They feel like they, get talked talked down to or belittled or condescended, and they have this old computer from like 1998, and no printer. Right, and little things like that have a huge impact. Like, you know it doesn't matter if you're saving the world if like you keep having to reboot Windows. Um so uh so the best, if you decide not to go off on your own and start your own thing, if you decide that you do want to work for another organization, Justin, to your question, there are so many job postings out there. How do you cut through the noise? The single most effective way to do that is through relationships. And relationships really happen face to face. I mean, you and I are on this call right now, because we met face to face.
Yeah.
We met face to face in Joshua Tree. Yeah, when was that? 2018, 2019? I mean, that was a
2018.
long
Yeah.
time ago. Yeah. And, one meeting in Joshua Tree in 2018 means that, 5 years later, we're now on this call,
Yeah.
right? That is the long-term value of developing face-to-face relationships.
Yeah. I think that's huge because there are so many different events that are organized around particular interests. And this is
Right.
such a great advice for this person who they're really good at their work, but they have the autonomy, they have the mastery, but they don't have the purpose. So like if they were to just like there's conferences around almost everything. Like there's like I'm sure there's a pickleball conference, and
Yeah.
I know for
Right.
sure that there are tons of fitness expos, and I'm sure there are also uh, about just about anything, and you could just go meet the people that are also interested in that interest, the companies that are in that realm, and then make those and conferences. Like for me, like one of my next steps is to go to FinCon and Economy. Like I'm now kind of moved into like the creator world, and Camp Fi kind of like got me connected to a lot of different like FI people, and then my background at Stanford has me connected to a lot of entrepreneurs, and then just my love of fitness, and the content I've created online has connected to me to a lot of people through fitness. But now I'm like okay, for me the next step is like I want to dive deeper into kind of like content creation around self-improvement, money, entrepreneurship. So like where are those people who are 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years ahead of me? Where do they congregate? And like to me, that's like FinCon, Economy. There's probably some other ones that I'm thinking of. So really, this is like incredible advice that anyone who's like reached that level of autonomy and mastery, and they're just looking for the purpose, is they just need to find the in-person events that are the like magnets for that interest, and go to those and
Exactly.
network, and then a job opportunity will appear.
Mm.
So
Right.
super
Right.
powerful.
I think that's the single best way to do it. Yeah. And if you can't go in person, to anyone who's listening who um, you know, you have some circumstances in your life that really prohibit you from going in person, the second best thing is uh to have Zoom, FaceTime, Skype. I don't know if anybody still uses Skype. Um, but video calls or phone calls are the second best thing. Um, they don't compare to in person, but it's better than nothing. The worst thing is written communication, email. You just get lost in a sea of words, and there's so much of that, especially people. The uh, I guess the higher your position, the more unsolicited inbound you receive.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it just becomes noise.
Yeah. So I'm curious, double clicking on the kind of like having a Zoom video, how do you approach somebody, and then about like jumping on a Zoom, and then how do you kind of like reward them for the time that they're giving you? So like back in the day before Zoom, like we'd take this person out to lunch and buy them lunch or coffee or something, right? But in the age of Zoom, like how do you take that person out to lunch?
Yeah. First of all, I would never use the phrase "jump on a Zoom" because it's just so cli cliche. Well, it's cliche, and it diminishes the actual time obligation that you're asking that person for, right? You're reaching out to someone who's really busy, who's pulled in 1,000 different directions, and by kind of minimizing it, like, "Can we just jump on a Zoom?" You're suggesting that it's gonna be something really quick and casual and easy, when in fact, to that person, it is anything but, you know? Um, it is uh it's not easy. It's an imposition. So the expression "jump on a Zoom," I think kind of it minimizes what you're actually asking for. Um, and in that sense, it's you know off-putting. It can be off-putting. Um, the the best thing, if you have a mutual contact, lead with that mutual contact, right? Say, hey, we've never met, but I am a friend of so and so's, and they recommended that I reach out to you. You know, uh, um, indicate that you have done your due diligence about that person. Like, if you're asking someone for their time, like the reward that the that the other person wants is they want to know that you're not going to waste their time. And what that means is that you have done all your homework up front. You've researched them, you've researched the topic that you want to talk about. Um, you have done all of the possible research that you could have done uh, through search engines, through Google, through ChatGPT, through Bard. Um, you've done the deep dive, you've read their articles, you've read their books if they've published any books, you've listened to their podcast, or if they're not a public facing figure, maybe if they're an executive at a company, you have interfaced with them to whatever degree you can interface with them in a public facing setting. And after having gone through all of that due diligence, you now have some very specific questions that you want to ask them. Um, if you can do that, like if you can really prove that you've done your homework, uh, I think in that case, um, they'll be happy to talk to you. You prove you've done your homework, and you also kind of acknowledge what you're, the bigness of what you're asking for. Because even like quote unquote just a 10-minute call, it isn't just 10 minutes, because it necessarily, if you know you have this thing coming up on your calendar, that means that you can't start a project, like a deep work project that you know is going to take you 2 hours, right? Because you have this interruption on your calendar coming up at 4 p.m. So you can't start that project at 3 p.m. So something that is just a 10-minute or just a 15-minute call, um, it necessarily kind of reshuffles your afternoon a little bit. Um, and some people deal with that by batching all of their calls, blah blah blah. But I mean, but then if you have a travel schedule or whatever, it gets messy, right? Then you need an assistant to help you manage your schedule. So now you've got like two people involved. Then you've got the Slack going back and forth, but so it becomes very complicated very quickly. Um, and so yeah, so people don't want to take on that additional level of complication unless they know that this is a worthy protege. And that's really what you can give them. Be a worthy protege.
Yeah, you're making me think of that book by Cal Newport called "Be So Good They Can't Ignore You,"
Yeah.
and I think
Mhm.
if you like literally did what you are essentially doing, you're literally like showing them the person that you're gonna jump on a Zoom with, and I'm air quotes
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
on the jump on the Zoom. You're showing them that you're being super respectful of their time. You deeply know all about them and their work, and you're
Mhm.
also like taking this super serious. You're well prepared, because I feel like um kind of like what you said earlier about it's all about relationships. So I do believe that even people who are really high in their career, they are looking for those people who to fill positions either in their company that need to be filled, or they have their real friends are looking for those people for their company. And so if you
Right.
come like a rock star that they like has prepared, and not like an egotistical rock star, but just like you've done your due diligence, like you're really performing high at work, even though you're not necessarily like stoked with what the company does. Then if they can like see that you're excited, engaged, and prepared, then they're like, hey, I don't
Mhm.
have a position, but like my best friend, his company is actually looking to fill this role, so I'm going to introduce you to him. And I
Mm.
think that is kind of, if they were to follow all that, you know, that person will feel like they give their time in a good way that will pay them back somehow, even if that's like passing a favor to one of their friends through
Right,
through like
right.
someone that would like fill a position at their friend's company.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, yeah, you want to be, like Lisa Simpson,
Yeah.
from The Simpsons.
Yeah.
Like you want to embody that energy.
Yeah, that's such a great avatar to kind of put in people's minds. Um, awesome. Okay, so what about the person who they don't want to go to another company? They want to start their own thing. What is kind of like
Mm.
the first couple steps? Like, I don't think we have time to like do a master class on everything they need to do, but what is like the first like two to four steps that they should be taking if they're like, I want to start my own thing?
So the number one thing is whatever product or service you are thinking about providing, validate that. And what that means is you want to know whether or not other people are willing to pay for the thing that you want to sell. Maybe the thing you want to sell is a service such as coaching or consulting, or freelancing. Maybe the thing that you want to sell is a product, such as anything ranging from online courses to candles, to I just ordered a custom keychain actually the other day, right? Um, I had it engraved for a friend. So whatever it is, whether it's a service or a product, um, you want to make sure that people are actually willing to buy the thing that you're selling. And so what that means is that you figure out the most low cost way of providing that thing,
Mm.
and then you see if you can sell, um you know, set some kind of a target, whether it's like, can you make, depending on, is it a volume business or is it a what, can you sell, can you make 5 sales this week? Or conversely, can you sell $1,000 worth of product or service this month, right? On the side, while you're still at your full-time job, right? Test that, iterate it. So it might be, uh, we'll use custom keychains as an example, right? Maybe you want to sell custom keychains and you think that there should be a big market for it. Uh, and so you start thinking, all right, who are the people who order custom keychains, and when do they do it? Well, I guess before Father's Day, there'll probably be some people who do it. Birthdays, graduations, those types of things. All right, where do people hang out on the internet when they're looking for birthday, graduation, Father's Day type of gifts? Who are the people who are going to be placing bulk orders? Maybe people party planners, wedding planners, who want to assemble gift bags that they give all of their wedding guests, right? And include, a little custom keychain. Sports teams, right? Maybe they'll place bulk orders, right? Where do they hang out online? So then you go to those forums, you go to those Facebook groups, you go to um, like any discussion forums, online discussion forums. You find the wedding planners, you find the sports team bulk orderers, you find the niche trade publications that service those communities. You find the gift shop owners who sell gift cards for graduations and Father's Day, right? And you see if you can just start like offering them, like, hey, I can offer you a bulk order of custom keychains, 100 of them for X amount of money. You see if there's any interest. And if you do this for a month, and you do this on the weekends, evenings and weekends, while you're still at your full-time job, right? Do it for a month and see if anybody bites, like see how much traction you get. And it might be that after a month of this, it's crickets. Crickets are chirping. Uh, what that means is that either you have the wrong product, or you're targeting the wrong customers,
Mm.
or your messaging is off. And so you'll want to then, after a month of 0 success, you want to tweak one of those 3 variables, either the product or the messaging or the target customer. So the next month, you tweak one of those 3 variables. Maybe you try different messaging, and you do it again. Test it for another month. See if it hits. And maybe you try this. Maybe you try the custom keychain idea for like 3 or 4 months. You've iterated over and over and over. You still can't get it to hit. Maybe after 3 or 4 months, that means you drop this idea, you put it to the side, and you say, all right, what else? Um, you know, what other ideas do I have? What's in my idea parking lot? And then you pull out a different idea from your idea parking lot. You have also been thinking about um, um, plant consultations, because all of your friends have these house plants, and the house plants are like yellowing and they're brown and they don't know why and what's going on. And you're like, hey, I will do, it's custom, it's bespoke. I will drop by your home for a $100 fee, and I will tell you exactly what is wrong with all of your house plants and give you a custom, like, step by step, here's exactly what you need to do. And then you can text me, unlimited texting back and forth.
Mm.
I'll be available Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. You can text me at any point during those hours. And you'll get a response from me within 2 hours during that window of time. Um, and you can text me with any questions that you have about how to like improve the health of your plants. Okay, so maybe you try that. That's your next idea. And then you go to plant lovers clubs, and you go to gardening clubs, and you go to the Facebook groups, and you try that for another couple of months, and you see if it hits. And if it does, like, if it takes off and it starts to get the early traction, then you know that you're onto something. and you know you can keep going. Um, but if it doesn't get that early traction, then you know to drop the idea and to move on to something else. And either way, you've tested this idea or these ideas while you still have the comfort and security of your full-time 9 to 5 paycheck.
Yeah. I love that. Yeah, I think that's so true is you essentially have to test out a bunch of ideas, like give them valid testing until you find the one that
Hmm.
actually like hits, meaning that it gets traction and that you can see that there's a need for it. And then that's when you like, okay, then you put more time and energy into that to develop to the next level. But the first step is you have to like actually like try out different products or services until you find one that actually like has product market fit. So that's really great advice. I'm going to do a bit of a transition. It's something that we talked about offline before we started uh, recording, but you recently, or I'm not sure how recently, moved to New York, and I live in the San
Hmm.
Francisco Bay Area. Um, I believe that you were previously in a low cost of living area,
Hmm.
or at least were a fan of that. In regards to building one's wealth, I'm just curious, why the change and what are your thoughts around high cost versus low cost of living areas?
Mm. I think the question is not do you live high cost versus low cost? The question is if you could live in any location on earth, where
Mm,
would it be? Pick that location and go live there. Um, Now, obviously, there are limits to this, like immigration law, you know. So maybe your answer is well, if I could live anywhere on earth, it would be, I don't know, Zimbabwe. But like you don't have a citizenship there, so that's gonna right. So there's obviously natural limits to your ability to do that, but um, but to the extent that you are legally and physically capable of living in your ideal destination, I think go do that. Because to and this is something that I've kind of learned the hard way myself to to live in a place that is not ideal for you because it is cheap or cheaper ultimately ends up being more expensive in the long run. And that's because you will settle down in this place um, that make you'll settle down in a place that makes sense on paper, and you'll buy a home there, and you'll make some friends there. You'll have some good memories there, but there's still a part of you that's like, man, I never lived in X, wherever the X is for you. Maybe it's by the beach, maybe it's in the mountains, maybe it's in a big city. You know, um, you're like that's where I really want to live, but that place doesn't make sense on paper, and this place does.
hmm
Um, and if you settle down in the place that makes sense on paper, but that isn't in your heart, ultimately, what's going to happen is you're going to be dissatisfied. And then you're going to pay all of the costs associated with leaving and moving and starting over somewhere new. And that ends up being more expensive in the long run, not just monetarily, but also just energetically in terms of your time, your bandwidth, your cognition. The older you get, the harder it can be to move. Not that that should ever stop you from moving when it's the right thing to do. Um, but yeah, to prioritize money over location, I think is to put what the cart before the horse, or to have the tail wag the dog, right?
Yeah.
Decide where you want to live. What is your dream destination? Live there. And then from that location, optimize your money to the best of your ability.
Yeah. I love this because I've been entertaining the idea for a long time of moving to a lower cost of living area. I'm currently in the San Francisco Bay Area, only because, and only because I could buy like the dream home there now,
Mhm.
or I can stay here and just continue to build my wealth, and then I can buy the dream
Mm.
home here. And
Mm.
so fortunately, my wife is like, no way we're staying in California. There's no way we're going to a low cost of living area. And ultimately, I think it has been better for the both of us because we absolutely love California, and it actually just gives us motivation to create more wealth and have a bigger impact in the world. And what I really love about what you're saying is you're encouraging people to follow like net fulfillment versus net, like only optimizing
Hmm.
for net worth. And I think I was optimizing for like, because like, what's the point of the dream home if you don't live in the dream like city? Like, if you live in the
Right.
nicest ass home, like in a place that has terrible weather, who cares? Like, you have terrible weather.
Hmm.
Like, and I'm one of those people. The reason I'm in, I'm 5 minutes from the beach in Northern California is because I want 300 days of sunshine. I want to be able to go to the beach on Christmas and literally like it's sunny and beautiful. And do I pay a lot of taxes to be able to do that? Absolutely. So
Hmm.
you were in the Las Vegas area previously, correct? And now you're in New
Hmm.
York.
Yeah, yeah. So I was in Las Vegas, and Las Vegas, for so many reasons, it made sense on paper, right? There's low cost of living, no state income
Yeah.
tax. You have proximity to a major airport. So for me, I travel for work a lot, and so I needed somewhere that was close to a major airport so that I could fly for I was on airplanes twice a month at least, round trip twice a month, for work. So I couldn't be just like out in the middle of nowhere in a very rural area, right? I needed to be somewhere that was right by an airport. I mean, Las Vegas, you've got flights coming in and out of there all the time. It's easy to fly in and out of, and low cost of living, and no state income tax, and sunshine. You know, it's sunny almost year round. You have mild winters. It's a great outdoor destination, great for camping, climbing, hiking. So, in so many ways, it made sense. But, and I lived there for 5 years. Um, but it, but I was, when you date somebody who makes sense on paper, but like your heart just ultimately isn't in it. It's
Yeah.
like that. Uh, cause because New York, in so many ways, it's expensive. The winters suck. There's high taxes. Like in all of those ways, it doesn't make sense. And yet, I can step out my door and I hear people speaking Urdu and Albanian and you know Nepali, and like it is it's the globe uh, condensed into one city, and to have all of those cultures, um, and to me, like, I'm an immigrant, you know, having being around people who are from Bangladesh and from Mauritania and from Uzbekistan, um, and to have them all in my living room because they're all friends, and like they're all coming over on Friday night for like a charcuterie board, like that is really important to me. And I don't know any other city in the US where you can get that in the way that you can find that in New York.
Yeah. I love that. And I love the message because you're really encouraging people to follow their heart. Because, where we
Yeah.
live literally is our life, right? It's our everyday experience. And if you love where you live, maybe you don't have the dream home yet, but like if you just love the area in which you're in, like I feel like that brings a level of like richness to one's life that like it doesn't matter like how nice your home is if you don't love like the land and the surrounding kind of like area, whether that's a concrete jungle like New York or the beach and the mountains like Northern California for me. So I think that's really important because I think unfortunately a lot of people in the financial independence community get so focused on like money and net worth and savings rate that they lose track of like the quality of their life.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I relate to that. I was very much like that for for many years.
Yeah.
Um but my friend when it comes to New York, my friend Johnny said it really well. He said everything that people either both love and hate about New York boils down to the density. Density is the reason that you'll pay 5 grand a month to live in 500 square feet, right? But density is also the reason why you have a lifestyle that is entirely pedestrian based. Like, a lifestyle where you can um, walk or ride a bike or take a subway to literally anywhere you want to go. And you never see sprawl and you never see parking lots and um, and you get, as I just described, and you get the whole globe in one city. You get a truly, truly international city. Um, all of that is a function of density. So I thought that was very well
Yeah.
said. It's probably the single best description of New York I've ever heard.
Yeah. All right. Last subject before we wind this down. Off air, you told me that you've kind of really been focused on your fitness over the last few years. So, like, what are some of your
Mm.
like key takeaways and lessons that you would share with the audience?
Yeah, so I've had kind of a very up and down fitness journey. So during the pandemic, um, during the pandemic, I gained maybe, I don't know, 17 or 18 pounds, something like that, of body fat. Let's be clear. Um, and so then post pandemic, um, I used a program called My Body Tutor, and I lost it was like 18 pounds in 18 months, right? So it was very slow and steady, um, you know, but a pound a month, very, very, very consistently. Uh, and then and it was by doing that I discovered weightlifting, um, and was in the gym quite a lot, and loved it. And then when the fellowship began at Columbia, the just time commitment of doing the fellowship plus still hosting a podcast was just like I dropped all my gym habits and I dropped all my food habits and I stopped working out. I started eating like a lot of my meals came out of vending machines. And so then it very rapidly in 9 or 10 months, I gained most of that weight back.
Hmm.
Um, so what's been interesting to me is I've heard about, people who will crash diet and then regain. Um, but I guess I had the false confidence of thinking like because my journey was so slow and steady, 18 pounds in 18 months, right? Like very consistent, very slow and steady. I kind of had the false confidence of thinking like that means my habits are dialed in. That means it's stable. But then when I had a major life change, which was starting this fellowship, that major life change was enough to like upend all my habits and put me back to square one. And so now that that fellowship has just ended, I'm again going back to the habits that I had pre-fellowship in terms of fitness. And I'm like, all right, here we go again. Um, and so I guess I don't know what the takeaway from that is, um, other than never rest on your laurels. I think it can be easy to do. It can be easy to kind of say, "Hey, I've made it this far. I've been very consistent for a very long time. Um, so I think I'm good, and maybe I can, But like, if you relax too much, um, you can undo a lot of what you've done. But that said, once you've done it once, you have the more knowledge and more confidence to know that you can do it again, right? Because you're not anytime that you do something for the first time, it's always more challenging because you're doing it for the first time versus anytime that you're like, well, I've already done this once. Now it's time to, like anytime that you're doing something for again, you're like, I'm not worried. I got this. Like, I know what to do. Uh, I know exactly what to do, so let me just do it.
Yeah. I really love
Yeah.
that because one of the things that I often think about, um, for myself as well as for my coaching clients when it comes to fitness is what is the lifestyle and the mindset that you can build that is like a version of your fitness that is sustainable throughout all of the different seasons of life, right? Because you're going to have times where you
Mhm.
take on a fellowship and kind of like your time to work out and focus on your, working out and your nutrition is, cut to a tenth of what it used to be. And
Right.
so like what is the sustainable kind of fitness lifestyle that can run with you in all seasons, right, of your life. and
Right.
and um I think that's one kind of thing I would just point out for the audience is and that's like a never ending kind of journey. Is the other thing about like
Mhm.
fitness is just like, you're kind of like starting the journey again. The thing is you never left the journey, right? You're just like
Mhm.
this next iteration you're probably going to be like, okay, like if I have something like a fellowship come up again, how am I going to do it better when it comes to like my fitness, right? Like what are the things that I'm going to do better? And that is similar to like the money journey, right? Like some years in seasons you like crush it, like you make tons and tons of money, especially as
Right.
an entrepreneur. And then like the market changes and you're like, what the hell, where'd all the money go? And then you have to like kind of
Right.
you have to like reinvent, like, okay, we need new product, new service, or new messaging, or a combination of all that. And I think it's kind of the same with fitness, is as you enter into these different parts of your life, like there's like you who had your podcast, but like what about like Paula when Paula has two kids, right? Or like me, like that's
Mhm.
what I think about. Like, okay, I'm a married man, but we don't have kids. Like, what like how do I build a sustainable fitness lifestyle that if we ever have kids, like I'll be able to continue to be at the level of fitness that I want to be at. And I think because
Right.
there's always going to be new responsibilities and new changes in life. And it's just like we have to prepare our businesses to weather all seasons. We have to prepare our fitness to weather all seasons of life.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good way of saying it. In because yeah, a business, I've my business has run for 12 years now, which
yeah,
means that I've seen a lot of market conditions, a lot of market cycles. Um and I've had to iterate, in order to make it last for the long term, I've had to iterate and adjust to what is happening in the broader market.
yeah,
Um and yeah, I think that's something in terms of fitness that that I've been discovering. Like I found weightlifting, like, which has changed my life. Like there's nothing that I love more than, especially upper body. It's
you're
my
you're
favorite.
literally making my heart sing right now because I just love like working out so much, and when I see someone else discover like weightlifting and the passion like
Oh,
bloom in them,
it's
I'm just like so happy right now.
it's so life changing. Um, it's just it's absolute. I don't know how to describe it. It's just absolutely life changing. Uh, Yeah, and that was something that I found, um, only what in the 18 months prior to this fellowship starting. Um, and it's such a game changer. But then I was spending, you know, prior to the fellowship, I was spending a lot of time in the gym. And I think I had my life kind of dialed into like, assuming all of the conditions are like this, I'll be set, right? So now the next iteration of that challenge is to what you said. Um, asking the question like, okay, if I can't spend when when the conditions of my life are such that I can't spend this amount of time in the gym, the amount that I would prefer, um, how do I maintain, right?
Yeah.
How do I keep it up? So yeah, so
Yeah.
that's the next piece of the journey.
Yeah, well, the way I was thinking through it in my head right now is just like you prepared for like a year, you prepared the infrastructure within your business to be able to kind of like run without you. Like you also have to like prepare
Right.
the infrastructure for your fitness if you kind of like take on a whole nother endeavor like a fellowship or something. And I don't
Right.
necessarily know what that
Yeah.
infrastructure is in your life, but like we almost
Right.
have to do the same thing is build that infrastructure to support our fitness through like the next phase, whatever that next phase is, especially if we know it's coming. Like, hey, you have kids coming or you have a fellowship coming, like how are you going to like build out the infrastructure for your fitness and your business so
Mm,
that you can go through that successfully on both fronts.
right. Right. Exactly.
Awesome. Well,
Exactly.
uh, I I let you know ahead of time. I wanted to give the audience a leave behind. So, what is one tip, tool, or strategy for fitness, one for money,
Hmm.
and one for life that you can leave as a takeaway or a leave behind for the audience member? Maybe something that they could go
Sure.
implement into their own lives.
Sure. Absolutely. With fitness, well, there's two. One is I really encourage anyone listening to get into weightlifting, especially if any women who are listening. They're it Just do it. Just give it a try. Like seriously, try it for like 3 months and then come back and let me know how much it's changed you. Um, the other thing is uh, with fitness, work out not just for how you look today, but for yourself when you are 80 years old, right? Like do it for the 80-year-old version of you. Because and know that there are certain things that 80-year-old you would want you to be doing that today you isn't necessarily thinking about. So stretching, for example, and mobility generally, right? When you're in your 30s, you're probably not thinking that much about mobility, but when you're in your 80s, um, that matters. And if you can start that practice now, then the 80-year-old version of yourself is going to really thank you for that. So keep that at the forefront of your mind, or just make sure you have really good form. Make sure that you're not overly taxing your joints. Um, you don't rob from the 70-year-old or 80-year-old version of yourself in order to serve today, right?
Yeah,
So those are my fitness tips. Yeah.
I love that one.
Yeah. Hmm.
I want to double click on the both the weightlifting and the working out for your 80-year self because there's been a lot of research and Dr. Peter Attia talks about it in his new book Outlive
Hmm.
um, that one of the
Hmm.
number one predictors of health span is strength, and that is built
Right.
through weightlifting or resistance training. So, and health
Right.
span is what percentage of your life are you physically able to like do the things that you want to do in good health.
Right.
And so I love that you're encouraging to essentially build strength, and whether you're a woman or whatever age you are, like building your strength up for that future self, so that they would thank you for the work that you put in at your current age.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Um, in terms of money, I would say grow the gap between what you earn and what you spend, and then invest that gap. And you can invest it in index funds. You can invest in starting your own company. You can invest it. back into yourself in terms of education and training. But whatever you do, success comes from growing the gap and then investing that gap and just keep doing that. And then in terms of life, um, let the heart lead and the mind execute, which is to say, don't make decisions because they make quote unquote make sense. Do what your heart wants and then let your mind figure out the most sensible way in which to execute that.
That is so powerful. Like, that is so freaking good, Paula. I'm like stealing that for sure.
Awesome. Awesome.
Any other things that you want to cover, or words of wisdom that you want to leave with the audience, or even any requests or anything?
No, I'd say tune into the Afford Anything podcast to hear more. So that's my
Uh,
my shout out.
Awesome. Yeah. Paula's content is super empowering. It's not just money. It's really about, proactively designing a life worth living. So her podcast played a pivotal role in my own money journey and life journey. Like, not even joking. I like binged it for like a solid 2 years when I was first on my beginning of my financial independence journey. And if they want to connect with you online, uh
Mhm.
where is the best place, and how do they find you?
Instagram. I'm on there like all the time. Um, so find me on Instagram at Paula Pant, PaulaPant.
Awesome. Paula, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me on.